Good morning, class. Welcome to another history lesson. I hope you all had a lovely weekend. Congratulations to all the Manchester United fans. I know I have a good number of Manchester United fans in this class. Of course, to Liverpool fans, better luck next time. So, just a reminder of what we've been looking at. We've been looking at, remember, our topic, our main topic is the Versailles Treaty. We have looked at the Paris Peace Conference of 1919. From there, we moved on to the Big Three: President Woodrow Wilson, Georges Clemenceau, Prime Minister Lloyd George. From there, we moved on to the terms of the Versailles Treaty. We discussed the War Guilt Clause, reparations, disarmament as some of the terms of the Versailles Treaty. From there, we further moved on. In our last lesson, we were looking at the consequences of the Versailles Treaty, and we discussed political violence, conflict in the Ruhr region, as well as hyperinflation as some of the consequences of the Versailles Treaty. Just to remind one another a little bit, we discussed that the Versailles Treaty, the Germans did not receive the Versailles Treaty with open arms. By that I mean that they did not really accept the terms of the Versailles Treaty, but rather it was a forced diktat. It means that the terms were just forced on her. And this led to political unrest. For instance, there were attempted revolutions, demonstrations were there. This also led to a hyperinflation. By this I meant that goods kept on rising, commodities, to buy things, it became expensive even to buy a loaf of bread. And moving on today, remember I said when we were starting this topic, when we were looking at the Versailles Treaty, I said there were a number of treaties that were also signed on top of the Versailles Treaty. The Versailles Treaty specifically dealt with Germany, but there were other treaties that were also signed at the Paris Peace Conference. So that's what we'll be looking at today. For instance, there was the Treaty of Saint-Germain, which was also signed in 1919. There was the Treaty of Neuilly, the Treaty of Trianon, and the Treaty of Sèvres, which was signed in 1920. Remember, at the First World War, Germany had allies such as Austria-Hungary, Italy, Bulgaria, and Turkey, though the major ones, which were known as the Triple Alliance, were Austria, Hungary, and Italy. The Versailles Treaty usually gets the most of the attention, but treaties such as Saint-Germain, the Treaty of Neuilly, the Treaty of Trianon, and the Treaty of Sèvres were also equally important. Note that these treaties were not discussed by the Big Three. By now, you should know the Big Three, not a new term. These were the President Woodrow Wilson from the United States of America, Lloyd George, Prime Minister of Britain, Georges Clemenceau, Prime Minister of France. These were known as the Big Three. This is not a new word. And these other treaties that we're going to be looking into from now on and the next lesson were not discussed by the big threes. They were not drawn up by the big three, but it was only the Treaty of Versailles which the big three came up with. This is because Germany, remember, was a very superpower. These other small treaties were drawn up or discussed by officers and diplomats working with foreign ministers of the Allied powers. So, remember, we'll be looking at 4 other treaties. The Treaty of Saint-Germain, which was signed in 1919. The Treaty of Neuilly, which was signed also in 1919. The Treaty of Trianon, which was signed in 1920. The Treaty of Sèvres, which was signed in 1920. We have already discussed the Treaty of Versailles. Just to remind one another, the word treaty simply means agreements. So these were agreements that were signed. Let's look at the Treaty of Saint-Germain. This was a treaty that dealt with Austria-Hungary. This treaty separated Austria-Hungary from one another. Remember, Austria-Hungary, at first, it was one country known as Austria-Hungary. But through this Treaty of Saint-Germain, Austria was separated from Hungary. Austria was no longer a superpower under the treaty, and some of our territories were divided. For instance, Austria lost Bohemia, Moravia to the new state of Czechoslovakia. Remember, at the Paris Peace Settlement, some countries were created. We already discussed this. For instance, we had Poland, and we had Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia. These were new countries that were created at the Paris Peace Conference. So, some of these countries were under mandate of Austria-Hungary, or they were rather colonies of Austria-Hungary. But through the Treaty of Saint-Germain, which dealt with Austria, Austria-Hungary lost Bohemia, Moravia to the new state of Czechoslovakia. Furthermore, Austria also lost Bosnia and Herzegovina. This was lost to Croatia, which was one of this was rather lost. Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina were countries under mandate of Austria-Hungary. So there was a new country, Yugoslavia, which was created through the Paris Peace Conference. So Austria-Hungary lost Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina to Yugoslavia. Through the Treaty of Saint-Germain, Austria also lost Galicia to Poland and a bit of land to Italy. Its army was restricted to 30,000, just like German army. Remember, German army also had been restricted to 100,000 soldiers. Austria-Hungary was forbidden to ever unite with Germany. The Treaty of Saint-Germain mainly dealt with creation of new territories. Why by this I meant that the territories that were under Austria-Hungary, these had to be made into new other countries. So it was the Treaty of Saint-Germain that dealt with such problems. Austria, as a result of losing so many colonies and territories, suffered another severe economic problem, just like Germany. This is because most of her industry had gone to Czechoslovakia, which was a new country that was created by the Paris Peace Conference. Other areas also suffered economically because suddenly became part of foreign states. So you will see that this treaty, as I said, specifically dealt with Austria, Hungary. It separated Austria and Hungary. This means that Austria became a country on its own, and Hungary became a country on its own. The joining together of these countries was forbidden, and the joining together with Germany was also forbidden. So, in our next topic, we'll be looking at other treaties, such as the Treaty of Trianon, the Treaty of Sevres, and the Treaty of Neuilly. I believe you should be reading on this. It's okay to read further than the teacher. Get your books, do some reading. Thank you very much.